Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to PCCS's EmPower Hour, where we have members of the community coming together to reconfigure humankind. My name is Alyssa D'Agosto.
And I'm Kevin Roman.
And we're here today to start off our civic engagement project. We are going behind the ballot, and we have partnered up with a fantastic organization called Spread the Vote. So we have with us today Kat Calvin, founder and CEO of Spread the Vote. Welcome, Kat.
Hey,
Thank
Kat.
you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, Kat, can you tell us a little bit about you?
About me? Oh my gosh, sure. I'm Kat. I live in Los Angeles. I run an organization called Spread the Vote. And our 501c4, which is our political arm, called Project ID Action Fund. And I mean, look, I've been in the apartment for a year. That's pretty much all there is about me, except that I watch a lot of Murder, She Wrote lately. Like, that's
Okay.
We love that. We love balance, so that's fantastic.
Love that.
That's great. So now with Spread the Vote, how long have you been, operating?
I started Spread the Vote early 2017. It's 2020. Oh my gosh, so 4 years.
Wow.
Time flies.
Yeah, right. Time flies when you're having fun.
It feels like a month and like a decade. Like
That's incredible. So can you tell us a little bit, for those who are watching that are not familiar with Spread the Vote, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially what we do is we help people get government issued photo ID. We're launching in some new states. So I think in the next few months, we'll be in a total of 17 states. Don't quote me on that, but I think 17. And what we do is we help people basically get all the documents required. So if you've ever been to the DMV, which we all unfortunately have, then you need certificates and proof of residency, proofs of identity, proof of name change, like literally everything. It's a real challenge for a lot of people. Help folks find those documents. We help pay for them. We help provide transportation to government offices, to the DMV, et cetera. Basically, we do everything that we can to help someone get an ID in their hands. And there's no requirement. You don't have to, vote or be eligible to vote or whatever in order for us to help with that. But during elections, we do also do a lot of voter education and voter turnout work with our clients and communities to help as many of those folks who want to vote or who we can, convince to vote after talking to them about how important it is and actually get them to the polls.
That's incredible. That sounds like an amazing group of people that probably are a part of this project. How many people are within your organization?
So we've got a staff of about 18, but we've got over 1,000 trained volunteers and hundreds of partners across the country. So it's really our volunteers and our partners that keep us going.
That's amazing. Nice. Wow. So what had inspired you to establish Spread the Vote? Like, what was it for you that you knew that you needed to do this?
The 2016 presidential election. I'd run nonprofits before. I'm sort of a serial social entrepreneur. But then I had retired and swore I would never run another one. And I was just very bored. I lasted a whole year, and then the election happened, and I was like, all right, I guess I'm back in it. So what most people probably don't know, is that in 2013, the Voting Rights Act, which is the great act that everyone sort of knows about from the 60s, there were marches, et cetera. We had the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And the Voting Rights Act did a lot to protect elections and to make sure that everybody in the country can vote. And so we had that from 1965, I believe, to 2013. And then the Supreme Court really gutted a lot of it. And so we saw from 2013 to 2016 and are seeing now, a lot of different things happen that made voting a lot more difficult for people, like voter ID laws. And so after the 2016 election, which was our first presidential election without the Voting Rights Act since the mid 60s, we saw both the impact that voter ID laws had on the presidential election, but also on state and local elections, which are so critical. 80% of the political decisions that affect your life are made in state and local offices. So it's so incredibly important. And because the margin of victory is smaller, because there's no electoral college, et cetera, it's a lot easier to manipulate those kinds of elections. And, there were a lot of amazing organizations that were trying to get rid of voter ID laws, either by going to the courts or by lobbying politicians. But it's a very difficult thing to change. When the Shelby County v. Holder case went to the Supreme Court in 2013, there were a few states, like 4-ish, that had voter ID laws. By the time the 2016 elections came around, there were 21, and we're now at 36 states with voter ID laws. And so it is something that's just taken off, like wildfire. But there are over 21 million eligible voters in this country who don't have government-issued photo ID, and it's really difficult for them to get. And so I sort of thought, well, if we can't really change this in the courts, if politicians aren't responding to lobbying, let's just get people IDs, which in my head at the time sounded really easy and fun. And then I realized really quickly, oh, this is actually very, very hard. But it's really important. Then we realized really quickly, if you don't have an ID to vote, you don't have an ID for jobs, for housing, for bank accounts, for a lot of medical care, for COVID testing and vaccines. In most places, it's just really frustrating, for all sorts of things. And so it really became about helping people get the IDs they need for their everyday lives, but then also for them to be able to make their voice heard at the polls.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Now that you think about it, I mean, I walk around my ID like attached to my phone.
Yep.
So I can't even imagine if you don't have that,
Right.
the frustration that must lie in there too. And you really aren't given a lot of opportunity when you don't have it.
Yeah, to my understanding, getting even just like your social security card is like hoopla over hoopla over hoopla to get, let alone anything else you need, to do so. Wow.
Yeah. It's funny because I do this for a living. I have staffs of volunteers. All we do is get IDs and get birth certificates and social security cards, etc. And I had lost my birth certificate years ago, like forever ago. I mean, not my social security card and my birth certificate, but then I ordered another one and it was a little expensive, but I could do it because I had an ID. But I just was like, I just don't want to go to the Social Security Administration. It's a nightmare.
Mhm.
And so I did not have my social security card for at least 5 years. And then literally 2 weeks ago, my grandmother randomly sent me my birth certificate and social security card because I guess at some point in the last 5 to 7 years, I just left it at her house. No idea how that happened, but it was such a moment of me realizing I have all of the privilege in the world. I run the only national ID org in the country. And even I wasn't able to get to the Social Security Administration. I still don't have a real ID, which I need to have, but it's so complicated to go that I haven't even done it. And so then when you think about our clients who are, largely unhoused or returning citizens, a lot of folks are undocumented, people living with disabilities, all of these other things that make it so difficult. It's so obvious and clear to me why it's difficult to get an ID, because I know how hard it is and how annoying it is and how expensive it is just for me to do it.
Right. So now you're dealing with multiple groups of people, and it's such big populations too that are also aren't aware. Now here you are trying to educate and then actually take that next step in doing the action.
And it's interesting because it sounds like a lot of the people that you are working with genuinely benefit from being a part of the voting process, with so many people, so many disenfranchised communities that really need that representation, and this is kind of like their step forward to getting that. So that's really cool.
Yeah, voter turnout in this country actually directly correlates to socioeconomic status. So 99% of the 1% turn out to vote. And then it just goes down from there. You can almost exactly look at what someone makes as an annual salary and what percentage, the chances of them voting. And the people who are most affected by government services and by government decisions, the people who need the most support and assistance are also the people for whom it is hardest to vote, and who automatically, when you have voter ID laws, when you have long lines at the polls, when you don't allow mail-in voting, when you have all these other things, those all affect the people who are most targeted in this population, and they affect them together, right? So there are very few people who not having an ID is the only thing that's stopping them from voting. It's that I don't have an ID, I can't drive, and I probably live in a low-income area where I'm lucky if there's a polling place, and if so, there's only one, and it's many hours long, and I can't afford babysitting or childcare.
Mm-hmm.
to have a job. It's an hourly job and my boss isn't going to let me take off, et cetera, right? Like, and so you have these micro barriers and they just add to each other. And it makes it so much more difficult. And that's why someone who is low or no income has almost no chance of voting. But if you're, a millionaire or even not, I'm a lawyer, and so I could always just leave my law office and go vote or whatever, because there was a lot of privilege attached to that. And so we have to be more conscious of the fact that the people who need to be represented the most are the people who are actually voting the least.
And I really like that. I think that one thing that I always think of is the things that you don't know. You may not realize how many documents or necessary things it is to be a voter. And you might say, all right, well, I want to vote. You know what? Everybody's voting. I should vote in the next election. And they'll wait till maybe 2014. Right. And then realize they're not registered. They don't have anything that they could participate in now, And I also think that it's, like you had said, with all these micro barriers for somebody that is a person with a disability that's worried about budget cuts. They're worried about their staffing. They're worried about their medication. They're worried about so many different avenues. Voting is so far down the line from the priority for them. To make it easier and grease those wheels is phenomenal to bring it back up to a priority,
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that it shouldn't, voting, and we're the only country where so many of these things are an issue. Voting isn't a thing that should be so difficult and challenging that we shouldn't need all these organizations. No other country has trillions of organizations designed to help people vote, right? Like, it's very difficult explaining what I do to a living to my friends who live overseas. Because first of all, nobody understands how we don't just give people IDs, because every other country does, right. And everyone's just automatically registered to vote. Like, these things are not issues in other places, but here, there's literally no group of people except for white men who own land who have not had to fight for their right to vote, because we built this country on a very exclusionary principle. And so what we are constantly fighting for, and we're in the middle of a huge fight for the soul of voting and democracy across the country right now. And it's all about making it as difficult as possible for people to vote when we should be doing the exact opposite. And we're, because we only talk about voting once a year, which I'm so glad that we're doing this now, because people are trying to just survive and live life and eat every day, which is hard enough. And then we say, oh, well, you have to do these 85 things by this timeline, 30 days before and 2 weeks before, and et cetera, and have all these documents in order to exercise your constitutional right. It's no wonder that there are just so many people who can't do it. And you're right, who don't know. We always, every election day, will get people who email or call us and say, I have to vote today. I need an ID. It's
oh, okay.
All right, let me just snap my fingers.
Sorry.
Election. But the thing is, it's not necessarily their fault. Everybody doesn't know all the voting laws in their state. And there's so many, they're changing so often, you can't know.
How can you keep up?
I literally voted, but I don't know how I voted, to be honest. I don't, I just showed up and I voted and I said, okay, I think that's good. I don't remember the voter registration process at all.
Right.
So I definitely understand that.
And that's why, there's so many efforts to do things like automatic voter registration whenever you engage with the DMV or a government office, right? And there's a lot of, in some states, there are a lot of efforts being made to make voting as easy as possible. Then you have states like Georgia, where they're doing everything they can to make it as impossible to vote as possible. And so, it isn't, I never get frustrated with people when they don't know what they're supposed to do. I get frustrated with the system, because that shouldn't be something that people have to study to figure out.
100%. Actually, it's great that you had mentioned Georgia too, because I was wondering if you could talk a little about a lot of talk about voter suppression laws, or laws that could be construed as voter suppression. And I think especially given that the election is essentially over, let's say the presidential election is over. So a lot of people who are voters now are like, all right, I voted, done deal. I'm good, Why is voter suppression so important now? And in general, why is it so such a controversial topic right now?
Sure. Well, there's always an election, right? So this presidential election is over, but hopefully we'll have more. If not, Armageddon has happened or things have gone terribly wrong.
Right.
But what happens is that in between elections is when the laws are made that affect the next election. And so the reason that we have right now, there are in 43 states over 250 laws being either pushed through and passed or considered that would restrict the right to vote in some way. There are also, however, in 43 states, over 700 laws being considered that would expand the right to vote. And so right now there is a huge battle. There's also a massive voting rights bill in Congress that we're trying to get passed, for the People Act. So call your senators, tell them to pass that. That would help expand the franchise. And there's another, the Voting Rights Act is in front of the Supreme Court yet again and could be gutted again. So there's a lot happening right now. And for a few reasons. A, because we had record turnout in 2020. Mm-hmm. One of the few things, the very few things that was great about 2020 and COVID is that it forced states to expand the voting franchise, right? It forced states to do things like send a mail-in ballot to everybody and expand the rules for absentee voting and expand the number of polling places and ballot box drop-offs and all of these things that voting rights advocates have been trying to get the government to do forever. And they finally did when there was a pandemic, and they were like, oh, we can't have a bunch of people in a room. Right. And, poor Wisconsin, they were the first people to have an election right after the lockdown, and it went terribly wrong. And you can't really blame them. Like, they've never done an election in a pandemic before. But what it did was it made every other state see, oh my God, we cannot have this happen, and really do a lot of things to fix it. But because of that, and because it was 2020, it was the most massive election of all time, we saw record turnout. We saw young people turn out. We saw people of color turn out. We saw poor voters turn out. Like, so many people who don't normally get a chance could, because we eliminated so many of those micro barriers. Well, that's great, unless you're a person in power who would like to stay in power, because when new people vote, they vote for new people. And so what we're seeing now is backlash. What we're seeing now is all of these states saying, oh my God, we absolutely cannot allow this many people to vote ever again, because they will vote us out. And so we have to do whatever we can to stop it. And so that's when you see states like Georgia, which just passed the most shocking suppressive bill of all time, in which, this is the headline thing you've probably seen, but like, spread the vote hands out water and snacks and support to people at the polls. That is now illegal. You're no longer allowed to hand out food and water to people standing in line, in Georgia in the summer for elections. They also did things
ask real quick. I'm sorry. Can I just ask real quick? I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but from your perspective, is there and I'm not trying to make this any sort of partisan or political topic, is there any like logistical background behind it? Like, I hear that and I'm like, why wouldn't I have water? Do you think I'm going to spill it on the machine? Like, where are you going with this exactly?
So, I mean, first of all, the cruelty is the point. I think that, so when you're looking at, and these are, voting rights should be nonpartisan. We are nonpartisan, but unfortunately, the vast majority of the time, there is one party that is suppressing the votes. And this was an up-down Republican vote in the state legislatures in Georgia. And there's also, and then for two reasons. One, Georgia just turned blue, and so everyone in Georgia is freaking out about that. And two, because there is resonance to the election fraud myth that Donald Trump started. Not because they actually believe it, but because it allows them to do things to suppress the vote. And so I think throwing in the water thing, along with everything else that's in it, it's a little bit of, okay, first of all, this will make life a lot harder for the people who were going to stand in line for hours and hours, because we do a very good job of making sure that poor neighborhoods and brown neighborhoods have far fewer polling places than rich white ones. B, this will allow us to continue spreading the lies that the organizations that are handing out water and snacks are somehow buying a vote. There's this real belief that, you only do things to help people vote if you are liberal, which should not be the case. Right? And so if you are trying to give people water, then you're trying to bribe them in some way, right? I also think strategically, I think they probably thought strategically it was smart, because this is a thing that will, I don't know if this necessarily will stand up in the courts, but while everyone is fighting this, maybe some of the other things they put in, will stand because people won't be paying as much attention to it. I think that actually was a really stupid thing to do because it was so extreme. It made the news pay attention. Like Iowa just passed a really suppressive voting rights bill. West Virginia is about to. Texas is about to. But none of them had anything in it so like wildly ridiculous as you can't give people water. So the news didn't pay attention to it. But everyone now is seeing what Georgia did. And even major Georgia businesses like Delta are having to stand up against it because it's so stupid. So I think that it was a miscalculation, but I think that they did it because the cruelty is the point.
Got you. Wow.
Yeah.
So to sum that up, the big thing to remember is that the biggest way that we can fight this right now is getting Congress to pass the For the People Act, which would significantly expand the franchise, mostly for federal elections, but in most states that would actually also impact state elections because most states do not have the money or manpower to hold two different sets of elections. And so we need that to be passed. And so everyone needs to call their senators. It's passed the House. The president is almost certain to sign it if it passes the Senate. But we really need people to call their senators and tell them that it's so incredibly important that they pass the For the People Act, because that is a really big way to wipe out a lot of these suppressive bills that are being passed in states.
I know that you mentioned a lot of different states, Texas and West Virginia. Can you just talk a little about New York and how we kind of stand in voting, or if only for the fact that sometimes we could take things for granted, and if Georgia could flip, who you never really know,
Well, so here's the thing about New York. Until 2018, New York was one of the worst places to vote in the country. It still has some of the lowest voter turnout in the country. And look, I live in California. We do too. But I would often have people from New York say they want to help people vote in Alabama. And I'd be like, well, they actually have higher voter turnout than you. So maybe we need Alabamans to come up here. But, New York had horrible voting laws. And then in 2018, due to some really extraordinary activist work across the state, New York passed a really great voting package. And then last year, due to COVID, the state made a lot of changes that they're making permanent. And everything from making it easier to vote, making it easier to vote absentee, some campaign finance laws changes, etc. So New York now is actually a fantastic place to vote. We do still have a lot of problems across the state and even across the city of people reporting that they're being asked for ID when they shouldn't be, and things like that. There's still a lot of discrimination. It's not perfect, but New York now is I'm so proud of New York. Every time something happens, it's like a thank you, because over the last few years, New York has really just grown in light years in increasing voter access and accessibility.
Go us.
Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome.
California yet, but you're getting there. Minnesota, I have to give Minnesota a shout out. Minnesota has had the highest voter turnout in the country for like 10 years at least. Like,
next question: who's a shining star?
First of all, their airport is the best because they have salad bars everywhere, and they are also the absolute best state for voting. So we all have to aspire to Minnesota levels.
Shout out to Minnesota. Great job.
So funny. So, Kat, to go back to the mission of Spread the Vote for a second. Now, if I am a person who does not have my government issued ID and I really want to get to know the process in getting that started, what does that look like? What does that timeline kind of look like? What is the first step, really?
So you can go to spreadthevote.org/ vote me. If you go to spreadthevote.org, there's a button that says need an ID or something. I just totally blanked on what the URL is. Look at our website again. Or you can text us at 323-694-0738. And if we are in your state, you can go to spreadthevote.org/states and see the 17-ish states that we're in. Then we can directly help. If not, we sometimes can sort of find someone to help or whatever, or give you instructions, etc. But we are happy to help with that process. How long it takes depends on what you need. So the first thing that we do is an intake, and we'll ask you a bunch of questions. Do you have a birth certificate? Do you have, okay, you're in Wisconsin, these 5 types of proof of residency are accepted. Do you have any of these, et cetera, et cetera? And we'll go through a list of what you need to get an ID and what you have. And then we go through the process of finding each of those documents. So 57% of our clients don't have a birth certificate. And so we have to help with that. Most of the time in most states, if you go to Vital Records and ask for a birth certificate, they ask for your ID. So we have to do a complicated and expensive online process in order to help you get a birth certificate. We may have to find a utility bill or a school transcript or a DD-14 or something else to help you get your proofs of residency. Luckily, in almost every state, your voter registration card counts as proof of residency, so we may register you to vote. We'll have to go through and you need proof of Social Security. Maybe you have a Social Security card, or maybe you don't. Maybe you have, a 1099 or something. But basically, we'll go through and help you find each of those documents, however long that takes. And then once we have all of those, we will help you get through DMV. Now, that used to be a very quick and easy process, and then COVID hit. And so now a lot of times we're having to sort of make appointments days, weeks, months ahead of time. Interestingly, we're now having a problem in several states because people are booking up a bunch of DMV appointments and then selling them.
Oh,
wow.
Hustle mentality. Okay.
I kind of respect it. I don't, but also I never would have thought of that.
Right.
Like super creative.
Innovative.
Yeah.
Times are hard. I get it. I hate it. And I wish you wouldn't do it, but I do get it. And never occurred to me. So the DMV process right now is a mess. It will, once COVID ends and we reopen, if COVID ever ends, then we will, that'll be easier, but that's really where the sticking point is right now. But essentially we go with you step by step. We'll pay for the documents, we'll make sure you have everything, et cetera. And just our goal, I always say we're sort of part Sherlock Holmes and part caseworker, and we're just, we're going to find whatever we need to find to get you that ID.
That's incredible. And this is all at no cost to the person who is requesting these documents.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
awesome.
amazing. Yeah, that really is awesome. So, Kat, can you give us the phone number that we can text again so we can make sure to put that in the comments?
Yes. 323-694-0738.
Perfect. And now that's for people to text to be able to get in contact with you guys.
Yeah, if you need an ID, or if you want to volunteer, whatever, you can. If you go on our website, all of the options are available. But if it's easier to text, or call and leave a message, then you can, and we will get back to you.
Awesome. I'm also going to put in here the website, spreadthevote.org, so people can take a look and also contact you that way.
Nice.
So I do have one follow-up question. So I know that we partnered up with you because we are starting up our civic engagement projects. We are trying to get way more involved in voting registration and voting rights and our civic duty because turns out a lot of us don't know. We're the majority that we don't know what our rights are. We are learning the importance of voting rights and why we should be going out there and learning the laws. So you had mentioned that you do education, like sessions, basically. What do those look like?
Oh boy. So all sorts of things. So one of the things that we do is we make our own voter guides. Because 77% of our clients have never voted before. And one of the things that we realized really early on is that election guides are really made at a very high level. I mean, I'm a lawyer who works with voting rights, and I always, during elections, have to pull up 12 different websites and search for all this information, and I can't figure out what's going on. And my mother has just given up at this point, and she just tells me, look, just give me a list of what these ballot measures are and which ones to vote for. I don't even know. It's really complicated. And so we decided, all right, we need to make our own guides that break down the the process of voting, that tell you what your like rights are under the ADA and what time are your polling places open in your location, et cetera. All of the sort of basic things that are hard to figure out. And then when we break down the candidates, first we break down what the office does, because it's very difficult to vote for insurance commissioner if you don't know what like job it is, and nobody knows, right?
Yeah.
Nobody knows what the board of supervisors is, right? And so we're like, how are you supposed to like hire someone for a job if you don't know what the job is, you know?
Right.
So we try to break all that down, and then we, have like voting plans in there, et cetera. And then we give those, and we print them out. Only 1% of our clients have access to phone even. So we print everything out. We don't do it on internet. And we do educational sessions at shelters, community centers with our clients, et cetera. We also put them online for free. Last year, because of COVID, we mailed 15,000 out to shelters and barbershops and beauty shops, and just all sorts of places, partners and community organizations around the country. We also have a program called Vote by Mail in Jail. It is the only national program to help incarcerated citizens vote while they are incarcerated, which hundreds of thousands of people who are incarcerated are actually eligible to vote. And so we try to help both educate them, help them get registered, help them get their absentee ballots, help them make sure that they can actually vote. And then we do a ton of just sort of like online sessions. Last year we did a series of educational videos about how to vote absentee, voting with a disability, voting. I don't remember any of the others, but there were a bunch. But like different videos, we do a lot of sort of Zoom chats, especially obviously now with COVID. But I'm keeping this up afterwards because it's much easier, because I can be in my pajama pants and
That's the way.
100%.
That's pretty great. But really, our goal is to try to help reach the communities that aren't really being reached, which is why it was so exciting to partner with you guys, because we want to be sure that we're able to answer questions of folks for whom, politicians aren't coming out and trying to get the vote of people experiencing homelessness. They should be. We keep asking them to. We're going to keep asking. But, and there aren't a lot of, we don't do civic education at all. And if we do, it's online. And it's usually pretty high level, and it's not designed for people who are living offline, for people who've never voted before, for people who are dealing with so many other things in their lives that trying to mine through voting education is not something that they're easily able to do. And so like working with organizations like yours allows us to say, okay, what does your community specifically need and how can we help? And is it these guides? Is it a video specifically on like what your rights are at a polling place are under the ADA? Like what is it? And then we can help, sort of design that and make sure that folks get the information they need.
I think that these education sessions are really what is so important. I know I could even speak for myself. Like I'm still learning as I'm kind of putting together this program with my colleagues. Like to this day, I'm like, okay, so what would my absentee ballot have looked like if I didn't show up to the voting poll in November? What would that have looked like? I'm still trying to like understand even just some of the terminology for me is overwhelming.
I know personally when I have voted, there's always like you go in for the major vote, so to speak. It's like the presidential election. All right, president. And then there's like a slew of all these other people. It's like, sure. And then you kind of almost align with like, your party. You're just all right, Democrat, or whatever.
Sounds good.
And then you don't realize like, even though you could identify with a party, like they might not have your specific interests in heart. So you have to be very specific about doing the work to kind of know, or be aware of like, hey, I'm going to vote for a president, but there's a lot more to it. So just be aware,
Right.
Yeah.
And even at the lower level, even at the local level, doing these local elections, like the election of this year, like I said, doing our research from early on, when we first reached out to you, Kat, we were like, there is an election. There's an election every year, right? We have to vote for things every year. Who are we voting for? What does this even look like? What does this mean? So I think that just overall being able to provide this information, knowing that there's this even just one resource that's readily available that we can say like, hey, what is my local election supposed to look like? What do I do with this?
And that's coming from us who have access to phones, computers, a home, XYZ.
Right.
Imagine people that don't have the same access to these things.
Right.
Yeah. Really, I mean, it is the exact same story of knowing, oh, it's really hard for me to get to the DMV. How is someone who is unhoused doing, right? Like it's the same thing where you just like realize these things are hard for people with access and privilege, what is it like for the other tens of millions of people in this country who don't have that access? And what are we doing about it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Kat, it was such a pleasure speaking with you today, and thank you so much. We want to have you back. I could listen to you speak for hours.
I could dissect this all day.
Honestly, so it was such a pleasure speaking with you and hearing about your organization and the resources that are available. Again, for our viewers, we put all the information in the comments section, and you also can reach out to us so we can get you connected with Kat. And I want to thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing these sessions and for talking about voting so early, because that's really going to be the key to making sure more people get out when it is election day. In New York, huge election in June. What is it, June 22nd? Very, very big.
Yeah, towards the end of the month.
Yeah.
That much I know.
Even that, I was like, yeah, I believe you.
Virginia and New York both have June elections, and one is the 8th and one is the 22nd, and I keep mixing that up. Google it. It's hugely important. So definitely be on the lookout. Everybody go out and vote.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
We will definitely be speaking to you soon. And for our viewers, thank you so much for joining us today.
Spreadthevote.org.
Check out Behind the Ballot and stay tuned for our social media campaign so you know how to get involved in voting rights and voting registration. And we will see you next week.
Awesome.